If you're a single man under the age of 35, you'd probably like to know what the ladies are looking for on an online dating site. A guy who had a few drinks and later got pulled over for buzzed driving. See, that could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates. And doesn't a guy who's back living with his parents but calls them my roommates just scream Mr. Right?
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
What's going on, everybody? It's your man, Big Mike.
Yep, and this is RC, Rod Calloway.
First of all, we'd like to thank everybody for being down with the Kings and for supporting Sports Kings Live.
Your listens, downloads, likes, and follows have allowed this show to grow by leaps and bounds in just a few months.
Now, if you have a product or a business and you'd like to promote it on this show,
it's simple. Just email us at sportskingslive@gmail.com. And once again, thank you for being down with the Kings.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get tired. I don't get tired. I don't get tired. I don't get tired. Get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get
Full-time
tired.
father, full-time artist. Ex-guard, he said grind harder, learn from every time you ever fail. If it never failed, just grind smarter. Iron sharpen, you the dag on they hindquarters and they all acting. Rap game, I'm a pallbearer. Kill May, get a call after. First look, it was all laughter. Kevin Gates, no small matter, made men believe when they didn't believe. Dive in the crowd, no safety holders. Got in the booth, no safety on it. Aiming, I shoot for the stars. Got the award, I ain't win no awards. Only meaning one thing, don't get tired, I go hard.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want the dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get tired.
Sports Kings Live, Rod Calloway here with you. We've been talking about this settlement that was reached last week while we were away on Friday, but this judgment was actually reached on Thursday evening, I guess, following the 1 hour abbreviated edition of the show. But it's a $60 million settlement, and for those of you, I'll just give you the backstory. For those of you that might just be tuning in or whatnot, or not familiar with the situation, but EA Sports, the makers of John Madden football, college football, and once upon a time ago, college basketball. EA Sports, they make a plethora of FIFA. They make a plethora of video games. I think they might actually be the number one video game maker, if I'm not mistaken. But for years, they've been making these video games. And I guess, upon originally making it, I guess the NCAA was just kind of like, well, the players, because if I'm not mistaken, the deal with the NCAA is that the players don't own their own likeness or images, if you will. And so I guess that kind of gave EA Sports carte blanche to be able to do what they needed to do in order to make these video games. And for me, being a gamer, I'll say this. I miss those video games. I miss those college football games, especially now where we have the college football playoff and, all of the excitement that surrounds that, and so now there is no video game to clearly represent what used to be or what is now, and it's one of those things where I want guys to get paid. If there was a situation where my likeness was being used, I would really like to be compensated for that, right? I would really like to be compensated for it. And so, I cannot, I can't knock, Ed O'Bannon, who was the first guy to actually take this thing, take this thing to court and try to get compensation for not only him, but for everybody that has been victimized, if that's what you want to call it. And, I'm looking at this dollar figure, $60 million. And as I looked at this thing, all day today, it just bothered me because I kept thinking to myself, even before I titled the show today, I was like, 60 million, okay, Rob, when is 60 million not enough? Well, 60 million is not enough when you're talking about more than a handful of people that need to be compensated. And I don't feel like EA Sports or the NCAA, and I don't blame EA, but I blame the NCAA because this should not have been going on this long. I mean, look, again, the original college football was released in 1993. The last edition was released. The 2013 edition was the final edition. Well, I'm not even going to say final because from everything I understand, EA Sports is hoping that after all of this blows over, that they'll be able to once again release a version of college football. But, you know, when you start talking about basketball and football players now, and I went through the breakdown of how these tiers are. The top tier teams in college football receive a minimum of $78,000 per school. The second tier teams receive a minimum of $47,000. The third tier teams receive a minimum of $31,000. And the fourth tier teams receive a minimum of $7,500. And the way that the tiers are determined are by the AP year-end rankings for 10 consecutive years. So if for 10 consecutive years you've been one of these teams that have been in the top 25 when the poll comes out, you know, following the national championship game, then you are one of these top tier teams. And with football, you know, because I was able to get specific numbers, right? I was able to find out that within the first 2 weeks of NCAA college football 2012 being released, that 700,000 copies were sold, which was an uptick of 17% from 2011. And then we did the math that if we just did the $49.99 price tag for games at that time and multiplied that times $700,000, it came up to be somewhere in the ballpark of $35 million. And that was just the first 2 weeks. Now, I'm under the belief that there was a way to take care of everybody without this judgment even having to go down. Because as I mentioned, you know, if you have, 52 guys or so on your college football roster, you know, if you're a top tier team and you're making a minimum of $78,000, you could afford to take care of each of those players and give them $1,000 and get them to sign off their likeness. And because they are kids and it is $1,000, then guess what? I'm more than sure they would have signed off on it because not only would they have been excited to get $1,000, but, you know, at that age, hell, who wouldn't want to be on a video game? I still make myself on video games to this day. And so I think that there was a better way to handle it back then versus what's going to happen now, because now you're talking about $60 million. Now these college football and basketball players that have been used in these video games, now they all have until the end of the month to get their names in so that they could be, you know, considered as a part of the class action settlement. Now, college basketball, again, that I don't think that the college basketball brand actually generated as much revenue as these football games did, because these college basketball games, it didn't last long. You know, I can remember, and I don't know if EA Sports was the producer of this game, but they might have been. But Coach K, NCAA basketball, which was released back in when the Nintendo, what was that? Was it Super Nintendo or Nintendo 64? Oh, Super Nintendo. When the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis and the Sega CD and those systems were very popular. I remember having Coach K basketball, and you know, it was the same situation as the college football, where you didn't have the names of the players, but if you followed that team and you knew their number, it was that player. You know, and not only that, but again, when the games came on, you had those montages of actual players, you know, they're using their images, their likeness. And Ed O'Bannon, I remember in one of those video games, I think they had him going off for like a slam dunk or something, you know, and so it was definitely him. And so, you know, but I don't think when you start talking about 120, what is it? I think it's 120 FBS schools. That doesn't even include the FCS schools. We're talking about football again. So you're talking about 120 FBS, and I'm guessing that it's 120 FCS. So let's just use that. Let's just use that and say 240, right? 240, and then that's 240 teams. And then when you start talking about college basketball players, oh my God. Like how many college basketball programs are there that were actually featured on video games? I mean, because it got to a point where they were doing the same thing. I mean, you could play with a black college. You could play with one of these small colleges. So let's just say I'll just throw 200, right? So we have 200 basketball teams, 240 football teams, right? Now, and again, I don't think that these basketball games generated the type revenue that these football games did. But just say they did. You know, they didn't last till 2013. And again, I shame on me for not finding out when the last EA Sports college basketball game was. I apologize. But 60 million just ain't enough, because now you got to start thinking about the number of players. Okay, so if we're talking about, as I mentioned, we're just going to use 52 as a rough number of players that are on a college football team, right? So if you're going 52 players, and I'm actually doing this math right here with you, right here live on this show. So if we're going 52 players on the roster, and we're saying that it's 240 teams being represented, you know, and that's hit or miss. We're talking about 12,480 players, right? 12,480 players. Now you got to multiply that times 20, because that's how long this college football video game franchise was around. So now you go times 20. Now you're talking about almost 250,000 players, right? So you got 250,000 players, but you only got a $60 million settlement, right? So, and we're, like I said, we're doing this math right here. So 60 million, right? And you take that and we'll just say 250,000 players. That is only going to break down to about $240. No, the show's not disconnected. I'm right here. So do you see why $60 million is not enough? We just did the math. We didn't even include the college basketball players whose names are being thrown into this hat. We just did football over a 20-year period, and it looks like the most that anybody's going to make is about $240. It works out well if you're EA Sports, right? It works out really well, because just in 1 year, in 2 weeks, you made $35 million off a video game, which I'm estimating that you probably doubled that over the next few months, which means that there's a chance you made $70 million in, I'll just say 3 or 4 months, right? Give or take a few. So in 1 year, 1 year of a video game release, so 4 months of a video game release is basically equal to what the federal courts have approved for EA Sports to have to pay these players that have filed this lawsuit, this class action lawsuit. $60 million ain't enough, because guess what? Originally, every player on those top tier teams who have a minimum of $78,000 could have all walked away with $1,000. At least. This is unbelievable. And yeah, while it does represent the first time that college players will actually be paid, guess what? The last game came out in 2013, right? So that means that basically what you're doing is you're going to pay these adults, because nobody that's on a college roster now None of